Let me just welcome everyone to the Middle East Institute and to today's talk. I want to take the opportunity to welcome Dr. Soli Shahvar, who is the director of the Ezri Center for Iran and Persian Gulf Studies in Haifa. Today's talk is going to be about Israel in a changing and shifting Middle East. And we'll talk a little bit about that before I hand the floor over to Dr. Shahvar. But let me talk a little bit about Dr. Shahvar. He's the founding director of this center, and he is a senior lecturer in Iranian Studies at the Department of Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Haifa. He holds an MA from Tel Aviv University and a PhD from SOAS, the University of London. He's previously taught at the Hebrew, Ben Gurion, and Tel Aviv universities. His research topics are really very wide-ranging, and his most recent works include the Baha'is of Iran, Trans-Caspia and the Caucasus, and the Persian Gulf New Trends in Interdisciplinary Research. He's also authored many articles and contributed a number of entries to the Encyclopedia Iranica and initiated a number of academic and civil-oriented projects. One of these is he's been the series editor and academic advisor for the Iran Cultural Series, in which they frame the classical and modern works from Iranian culture, and these are translated into Hebrew. I think there's a total of 6 books that's been produced at the moment. Okay. So for today's talk, Dr. Shahvar is going to really talk about the Middle East. I mean, we all know what's going on now in the Middle East, the recent changes, the trends, the newest developments, and there's a lot of uncertainty. I think that what is very interesting today for us is actually to really hear Dr. Shahvar's views and the perspective of Israel and how it views these developments. It is part of it and yet slightly on the outside. So you get a slightly different perspective of how the events are unfolding and where they could possibly head as we move towards, hopefully, to some kind of resolution. So if I could just hand the floor now to Dr. Shahvar.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and to the audience. It's nice to be here. First time in Singapore, and from what I've seen, I hope it's not the last time. It's a very interesting country. As Michelle said, I decided to present here what the Israelis, or the Israeli, I don't want to say government, not only the government, but also the society, or the majority of the Israeli society, see the situation in the region, the Middle East region, and to present the challenges and the opportunities seen from that side. As you know, Israeli, shall we say, security policy has been decided for, I would say, all its existence by the threats that has been opposed on her since the establishment of the state in 1948 to now. And these threats are emanated from the enmity of Arab and Islamic countries towards Israel, mainly those neighboring her, but also in the second or third circle of countries. And this actually brought Israelis to look for a different version, or to accommodate its national security policy towards these threats. One of those in 1958, as you know, is what they call the periphery doctrine, that given the animosity of the Arab states, so Israel started to look beyond the Arab countries, which means it brought Israel to cooperate with Turkey, Iran, the Kurds, and Ethiopia, countries on the periphery of the Middle East. And today we have kind of a development that it's going to be, or is developing towards vice versa, with the animosity of Iran mainly, some kind of animosity with Turkey, although the relations resumed after the solving of the Marmara problem, the crisis, but still there is certain animosity that I will explain further. The Arab Spring, I think it's one of the highest, or I would say the major marks that we see a shift in Israeli circumstances, Israeli policy towards the region. And this is because the Arab Spring, contrary to the Spring of Nations in Europe maybe, it was a destabilizing phenomena or development that actually destabilizing many states within the region. Take it from Tunisia when it started, to Egypt, and to the Gulf region, and of course Syria and Iraq when we see the problem heightened. This created opportunities and threats. I mean, the Iranian threat was already developed in 1979, so it's not actually a new threat, but it escalated. I mean, the Iranians tried to hijack the Arab Spring by trying to move in and to create it or to present it as an adoption or imitation of the Islamic Republic or Islamic Revolution. This didn't work with the Arab countries because they detached themselves from that, that kind of relation with the Iranian thing, but still the Iranian threat is there. But as we can see, it created problems for Israel on the Syrian front, to some extent also on the Iraqi front, although the Iraqi front, we can say it has been diminished since the fall of Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, as you know, Iraq under Saddam and even previously participated in all the conventional wars against Israel, units from the Iraqi army. But after Saddam, we can see a turmoil within Iraq that actually, in a way, diminished the threat towards Israel. The same happens in Syria because of the conflicts there between Sunnites and Shiites and the other involvement factors. Actually, it weakened the resistance or the threat from Syria to some extent. I will go into this deeper later. The Middle East has never been a simple region to talk about. It's always complex, and always you need to come up with new strategies in order to tackle the problem. So the new strategy, the new circumstances that we can see is that we have actually two superpowers, if you want to regard the Russia superpower or powers, are involved. There are few hegemonic powers, regional hegemonic powers, or powers who are regional powers that are aspiring toward hegemony in the Middle East, like Iran and Turkey, and to some extent also Saudi Arabia, are involved in it. And within that, on the lower level, we have non-state actors are involved, like all these militias, Shiites, Sunnites, all these organizations. I mean, if you think only about Syria, we have about 160 different Sunni organizations and militias are involved in the Syrian conflict. So you are talking about a very, very complicated issue, which makes the situation very complex. But given the fact that those factors are not actually pinpointing their attention towards Israel for the time being, it creates a better atmosphere for the Israelis from the security-wise. And then we are talking about a region that has different identities, and the identities are not always national, on the national level. For example, if you are talking about the countries like Iraq, Professor Slaglet will correct me if I'm wrong, or Syria, the true identities are subnational towards the minorities rather than towards the states. So we are talking also here a complexity of identities. All these actually brings up, add to this insecurity and this complexity of the region, and to the question of destabilizing issue. And of course is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has been since the establishment of Israel and even before that, which to some extent, although there are certain negotiations going in the back from time to time, but it's more and more, in my view, is going towards the not being solved so easily. I mean, it distances itself from the end point of solving, in spite of all these negotiations, whether within the region or out of the region. So we see that there are core issues that cannot be solved. And I mean, if you take it, Annapolis 2008, the Israeli side, or the then Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, offered almost 98.5% of the territories, and still Abu Mazen, I heard him personally, saying that there was a difference of 1.5% for peace to take, for peace agreement to take place. It means that if you are not talking 100% return of the territories, which is from the Israeli point of view impossible, then we are actually faced with a situation that is unsolvable. And then what the Israelis are actually trying to do in such a scenario, they are actually what we can say managing the conflict. Not solving the conflict, managing the conflict. How do you manage the conflict? I think the key word here is interests. So if we are talking about interests, going back to the Palestinian, starting with the Palestinian issue, the Palestinian interest is, of course, the ultimate interest is to get back the territories. But in the meanwhile, if we are agreeing that is unsolvable, if we are talking about the authority, Palestinian Authority, which is the West Bank, then there is a cooperation between the Israeli side and the Palestinian Authority in terms of security. And security, I don't mean only for the Israelis, but also with the Palestinians. And the Palestinian Authority, I would say roughly about 70% of this security is provided by the Israeli intelligence and security forces. Look what happened in 2005. Israeli pulled out from Gaza, and you had Hamas and Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen, Dakhlan, and then you had, in a very short while, Hamas taking over. And the same thing happened, actually almost happened in the West Bank, but with the cooperation, security cooperation between the two sides, the Palestinian Authority and the Israelis, the terror apparatus, if you want to call it on the other side, resistance apparatus, actually was revealed, and in a way, to some extent, to a large extent, was distracted. So organized crime, or excuse me, organized terror in the Judea and Samaria area, West Bank, has been given a very severe blow. And that's why you have now, in recent year and a half, you have more and more what we call personal terror, that people go with knives, things like that, because it's not organized, it's initiatives. What we can see, maybe the effect of or influence of the Al-Qaeda and Daesh ideology. So we have kind of a cooperation with the Palestinian Authority. On the other hand, we have the Palestinian Authority is almost entirely, and also Gaza, dependent on the Israeli providing energy, for example, gas and electricity. And on the other side, for example, most of 80%, almost 80% of the products produced in the West Bank are into the Israeli market, not for export beyond Israel, but into the Israeli market. So there is kind of dependence and cooperation on this side, which I call, maybe you can say, managing the conflict and not necessarily solving the conflict. With Gaza, of course, there is this tension between Gaza and Israel, but since the last operation in 2014, we can call it operation, military operation, or war, whatever, Hamas didn't shoot anything into Israel. The shots that came with the rockets or other things are from blister or other groups actually within the Gaza Strip. And these were being actually handled or retaliated to by the Israeli security forces. So Hamas, in a way, has been deterred, you can say, or understood the causes of the results of such a firing into Israel. So we can say that there is kind of semi-cooperation, I wouldn't say the word cooperation, but understanding maybe, that for the time being. And this actually caused Hamas also to come up with this new proposal, maybe, which is we are recognizing 1967 borders of Israel, but we don't, we are, recognizing the 1967 borders, but we are not recognizing the state of Israel, which is a little bit what borders you are recognizing if it is not the borders of Israel. So this is a little bit, but this is a policy of Hamas in order to show a moderate face, a more moderate face, but of course this doesn't help to solving the problem. Turkey. Turkey has been in conflict with Israel over Marmara, of course, but I think it started already from the rise of Erdogan and his very Islamic-oriented or Ottomanist, Turkish-oriented policy. It started with a zero conflict policy of Davutoglu, but it developed into many conflicts that Turkey is involved in today, primarily Syria, of course, but also on the other fronts. So there is tension with Israel over, for example, the supply of energy in the Mediterranean. Yes, the Turks want in, but Israel is tending more to go with Cyprus and Greece, which enrages Turkey. But on the other hand, today we have, because of the ISIS taking over Syria and Iraq, or parts of Syria and Iraq, what happens is that there is difficulty transporting Turkish products into the Gulf. So what happens today is that Turkish ships come to Haifa, where I come from. They unload their products. Turkish drivers take the products on trucks, go through Jordan, go to Gulf. So that's kind of a cooperation that there is. There is also cooperation on security issues between Israel and then, of course, there are economic issues, which is continuing as before. So we are seeing kind of two-phase relations. If you take the other side or negative side of these relations, we see Turkey as part of its Islamic policy, not only trying to, I don't want to say Islamicize, but to increase the Islamic factor and influence within Europe on the one hand, and in the Middle East on the other. So the improvement of the relations with Turkey after Marmara has caused the Turks actually starting to invest into Islamic organization within Israel. And this is a potential tension. It's building up towards a potential tension between Israel and Turkey. So there is a two-way kind of opportunities and also challenges on the other side. Syria. Syria, of course, is a problem, a major problem. I would say this is one of the most, if you combine it with Lebanon, is the most problematic strategic issue for Israel. Why? First, because Iran is involved there. And it's an Iranian policy, actually, to try to get a foothold around Israel wherever possible. So they have a foothold by supplying Hamas with finances and military, or trying to do so, and they succeed from time to time. And of course, Hezbollah on the other hand. Now it extended into Syria. And in Syria, as I said, there is a lot of chaotic situation. Hezbollah is involved. If you remember, about 2 years ago, or maybe more, I don't remember exact year, but there was an Iranian general together with Jihad Moghnieh, the son of the famous Moghnieh, and a number of other people being killed in southern Golan Heights, Syrian Golan Heights. And this was part of an Iranian attempt to create a Quds force. I assume you are familiar with the Quds force by Commander Soleimani, which is part of the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards. It was an attempt by Iran to create a Quds force for Hezbollah in southern Syrian Golan Heights, in order to enlarge or extend the possibility of attacking Israel mainly by terror, also by the capabilities of Hezbollah, which today are beyond just terror, going and exploding somebody or committing suicide bombers. They have rocket capabilities and even missile capabilities to cover today the entire range of Israel, from the north to the south. So this attempt was actually Israelis retaliated, and actually the whole delegation that was there, including the Iranian general, were killed. And actually this was the name of the general I don't remember, but it was the general's presence there was to show this new force of Hezbollah how to pinpoint targets within northern Israel in order for attacking. So it was kind of a graduation after having passing training in Iran for some months before that. There are also the belt of Sunni villages on the southern Syrian Golan on the northern side of Israel. The Israeli policy here has been to show, not only show, but to practice humanitarian aid. And the humanitarian aid has its humanitarian part, and also it has its strategic part. What I mean by that, it means that by providing medical care, which means not only on the field hospital Israel created in the north, but if necessary also within Israeli hospital within Israel. In very difficult cases, they are brought to Israeli on the expense of the Israeli society, actually. Nobody, pays for that. With the serious cases. Providing blankets, providing whatever is necessary in order to keep the, I don't want to say normal life, because Syria, I cannot imagine a normal life, but kind of a stability to their life in exchange for preventing all these groups, jihadist groups that are within the range of the southern Syrian Golan Heights to move into Israel. And it works very well. So this side getting the medical treatment, blankets, basic material, and in exchange they provide some kind of a security belt and preventing the infiltration of these forces into the northern Israel. And also we have the Druze the Druze component in Syria, which the Druze are usually loyal to the country that they live in. So the Druze of Syria are loyal to the regime of Assad, and the Druze of the Golan Heights on the Israeli side, they are also loyal to Syria. But those of the Galilee, they are loyal to Israel and they serve in the army, for example. But these in the Galilee, they have families not only in the Golan Heights but also on the East Syrian side. For because of this friendship between the Israelis and the Druze from Israel, the Israelis are trying, and until now they have been succeeding, in preventing a massacre of the Druze in Syria. And they have given, of course, they have let the other sides in order to know that the Druze shouldn't be dealt with violently. Moving to Iraq, I think with the Iraqi government, Israeli side doesn't have so much of relations because it's influenced by Iran. But with the Kurdish element in Iraq, there has been kind of a historical, not too long ago, but in the 60s, 70s, there has been a very good relations between the Israeli state and the Kurdish of Iraq. Then under the Ba'ath Party, because of what I said before, that the Iraqis used to actually send forces in all the conventional wars against Israel, and because of the partnership between Israel and Iran versus Iraq. And this historical friendship still, to some extent, goes on today, from time to time, whether it is by Israeli support in future Kurdish independence or the desire for independence, and also by supplies of these and other issues, whether it's intelligence or other equipment. Now, the big opportunity, I think, is the going south to the Gulf area. And this, of course, connected with the Iranian threat. I mean, there is a confluence of interest between Israel and some of the Arab countries of the Gulf, primarily Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. And this is, I think, we are within a shift of generation within the Gulf. New generation are coming as leaders. They are even now called by their short version MBS and MBZ. Yes? Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Zayed in United Arab Emirates. And this generation seems to be less restrained and more forward-looking, less interested in a pan-Arab or pan-Islamic issues, and more interested into their own national interest or regime interest. We can be more exact. And of course, when the threat is rising from Iran, I mean, if we are looking into Iranian factor in this, shall we say, 20, 30 years, even before the revolution practically, we see that the Khomeini movement or the revolutionary movement already started in the mid-60s and spread into the Gulf, not only in Iran, but spread into the Gulf with networks based on the Shiite loyalties. And we can see actually a representative of Khomeini being sent to different countries in the Gulf on the Arab side, and they started to develop these local networks connected to the revolutionary network in Iran. So Iran was the first stage, toppling the monarchy, and from that point onwards, what we know as export of revolution, but it's a system that the Iranians actually haven't given up, and the system goes this way. We can become an empire again, Iran, not a Zoroastrian or pre-Islamic Iran, but an Islamic empire, Islamic Shiite empire. And the way we can do this is to use the Shiite communities in this region that we have already fed our network, our revolutionary network, into it from the mid-60s onwards, and to topple these regimes, the Sunnite regimes. And if we do that, and if you look at the map, oh, we don't have a map. If you look at the map, so taking the Gulf region, most of the population is Shiite. I mean, if you take Iran, Iraq, by itself, both of them, one 90% Shiite, the other one 50-60% Shiite. So this is already the majority. So we are talking 70% Shiites, and also, of course, the oil fields of part of the, at least, oil fields of Saudi Arabia, and to some extent a little bit at Kuwait. This is, and Bahrain, of course. We are talking about a Shiite Gulf, we can call it. So if we use these networks of Shiites in order to make revolt, like they are doing now, for example, in Yemen, yes, to topple those regimes and to bring about a Shiite regimes like they did in Iraq, so what would happen? We will have not only Iranian influence and, of course, a hegemony in the Gulf area, but even beyond, we will have on the waterways, Hormuz, of course, naturally, but also Bab el-Mandab, the entrance to the Red Sea, because the Yemenis there, the Houthis, are actually acting there as well. So in this way, and with the connection from the north, Iraq, which already under control, Syria, partly under control and continuing, and Lebanon with Hezbollah, we're actually creating a hegemony that is controlling the most of the Middle East, or from energy-wise, most of the Middle East. Add to this also Azerbaijan, which is 70% Shiites. Yeah? Then you get kind of a Shiite dream, I would say, of an empire, as I said before, Iranian, under Iranian control, but on the Islamic version of it. So this is something that it's on the top plan. And Iranians have been doing this part one by the other, whenever it is possible, and they're moving this way, yes? So this would give them definitely a control of the region. Now, the Israeli policy towards this was to actually, in Syria, not to be involved, only on the humanitarian side, but retaliate to every shell that lands in Israel, whether it is intentional or unintentional. And the shells, whether it is by Syrian regimes, the Syrians as a responsible, or the authority responsible on the region, they will get hit, or some targets will be hit, and also those who actually fired the shells. The same goes with Hamas. Now, beyond that, we can see that the Israeli policy is, as I said at the beginning, is looking for interest, shared interest. And this sharing interest, I gave it in kind of a summary way. I'm open to this for the question and answers session. But mainly it is what we call today with the Arab moderate regimes of the Middle East, which is Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan, to some extent also Algeria. Now, we have to understand that the Israeli government prefers to deal with states rather than sub-states. It means with countries like Jordan and Egypt, there are peace agreements. The peace agreement held no matter what. Even under Morsi of Islamic Brotherhood, it kept. They didn't abolish the peace agreement with Israel. So, but with the Palestinians, there is always a tendency that, you know, they won't keep. First of all, because the Palestinians are divided. I mean, today we have what the Israelis like to say Hamastan, the land of the Hamas, and the West Bank, or the Palestinian Authority. Some Israelis refer even to 3 regions, Jordan being 85% Palestinian, so we have 3 different things. But we refer to the 2, which are in constant conflict with each other, and they can come with, adopt a unified policy or reconcile together. So that's a problem as well. Now, Israel has been facing threats from the conventional into the unconventional. What I mean by that? I would say up to 1973, the conflicts were conventional. Yes? Different wars. Why I say under 73? Because in 73, you actually see the optimum situation, optimum circumstances to win a war by the Arab side, Egypt and Syria, and some forces from Iraq too. But still, they were, at the end of it, defeated, militarily, yes. I mean, Israeli forces were 101 kilometers from Cairo, with nothing between this distance and Cairo itself, and 56 kilometers from Damascus, within shelling distance from Israeli mortars. So 73 is very important, because from that point of the Arab countries understood that winning Israel militarily, conventionally, is impossible. So we have 2 different directions developing because of that. Unconventional activity. Now, unconventional activity was mainly towards the what we call nuclear activity. So Iraq decided to develop its nuclear, and then we have Israeli retaliation in Osirak in 1981. The same thing, Syria in Deir ez-Zor, 2007. Also, the facility was destroyed. So the threat problem, and the most major problem, is Iranian threat. So the Obama administration managed to tackle this by this 5+1 agreement of July 2015. But this is for 10 years, depending on whether Iranians don't have any undercover or secret plan that the West cannot trace. But provided it is 10 years, it means that you have 10 years to tackle this problem with the Trump administration, and this is the way that Israel is trying to actually work out some kind of maybe new sanctions, and there are enough reasons to impose sanctions that are out of the 5+1 agreement, because the 5+1 is only on nuclear issues, but all the issues of terror, or missile development, all these are certain, or even terror activities against the United States itself and other parts could be attributed to Iran, and as a result could be sanction implemented. But of course, for this you need again a coalition, and this is a difficult thing to do. So the Iranian threat here is still very tangible. Then we have we talked about unconventional, we have the subconventional reaction to the inability to win conventional wars. And this is mainly terror activity, and terror, whether it is suicide bombers or it is rockets like in Hamas and Hezbollah. And this is mainly to target civilian population. And I think this has been to some extent minimized and deteriorated because of Israeli developing new weapons against rockets, and I would say also because the strength of the Israeli society as well, because it's the only Jewish state, they don't have any other way to go, and so the population is quite showed some strength in this way, and they actually managed, they showed some, I don't want to say acceptance, but they showed some coexistence with this problem. And another version of this is what we call the personal terror with the knives and things like that, which because of the different measures, this has been under cooperation with the Palestinian Authority security services, this has also been managed and controlled and the terror limited in range. The other, I would say, sub-conventional activity is the delegitimization of Israel and the activity of the BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, that, well, some places it succeeds, some places it fails, and Israeli government actually dedicates to it quite a large sum in order to combat this. But I want to show you one example of its negative results, and not to the Israeli side, to the Palestinian side. There is a company called SodaStream. It produces carbonate water and different drinks is carbonated. And their factory was in the territories, in the West Bank. So what happened? They employed 1,500 Palestinians. Because of the BDS boycott, the factory moved to Israel. These 1,500 Palestinians were fired. Their employment was stopped. So they lost income, and the company, by moving back to Israel, the orders from those countries that actually joined the BDS renewed their orders from this company, because now it's in Israel, it's not in territories. So it tripled its income. So this is a way to understand that the BDS is not actually bringing always good results for those people that it actually aims to help. So we can see that in general, we can see that there are different reactions by the Israeli government in order to try to face the challenges and to seize the opportunities being created within the region. And I don't want to extend that beyond the region, but if you're talking, there is talks going on with a number of Asian countries with which Israel still doesn't have diplomatic relations, but they are developing kind of talks about free trade areas. In Africa, there recently, a few months ago, there was a kind of meeting of 7 leaders of African countries with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Uganda, marking the 40th anniversary of the Entebbe operation. But still, they talked about renewing the relations with Israel and increasing it, actually. There is talks with Chad regarding renewing relations with Israel. The same thing goes with South America. We can see there that Israel actually improved its relation with Brazil and countries like Brazil and Argentina after the so-called anti-Israeli leaders have been changed given the recent elections there. So there is possibilities being created in different countries, in different regions, and I think in whole we can say that Israel is facing 3 main problems today. One is Iran, the other is the political Islam represented by the Islamic Brotherhood, led by Erdogan. I mean, he's the leader, the proclaimed leader of this movement today. He supports all the organizations and states that are actually promoting, like Qatar from the one side and Hamas on the other side. And of course, the third one is the supranational ideology of the Daesh or Islamic State that hasn't, for the time being, presented Israel as the main target. First, it aims to topple the Islamic and the Arab regimes in order to for the second wave, maybe to target also Israel. But Israel is not the, as far as we have seen today, is not the first target or the first or primary objective. So these are the challenges, and in general, I would say that the time is finishing. Yes, I would say that Israel tries to seize these opportunities and to, of course, to tackle those threats by careful move for the time being, very careful, not to get too involved, although there are push from certain section in Israel to, to be more active on those fronts. For example, there is by all research and all data today, Israeli society is shifting towards the right. And this is because of a number of reasons that I would happy to move into question and answers. But the shifting to the right distances Israel from what I started and the Palestinians from reaching a conflict, solving the conflict. And you can see the same patterns given mainly given the education of the Palestinian Authority towards the next generation, hatred of Israel, to some extent also the Jews, into the elementary and high school education, brings eliminates any hope for the next generation being more, I would say, promising for solving the conflict. Because if you feed this generation into hatred, so there is no chance for hoping to change it. But on the other hand, we have all these social networks today that have their own effects on the situation, some to the worse, some to the good. So, for example, we at the center, in our center, we had a 4-year experiment of launching a site in Persian about Israel. In order, we took Israeli articles appearing in the Israeli press, and we only translated it into Persian, so that the Iranian public would understand or can read what's happening in Israel. And the reaction was tremendous. So there is a lot of hope in these social networks. And as I said, there is the other side, like the Al-Qaeda or the Daesh, using these networks, these very networks, in order to spread their own ideology, which, of course, puts pressure on companies like Facebook how to handle with this. And recently I heard that they are going to add about 5,000 to 6,000 new inspectors that will see the contents. But when you have only less than a second, 0.9 of a second to look at each page, I don't know how much control you could have. I think I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.